Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of 100 Days and Beyond, where we speak to I would say the wonderful professionals, the people behind the scenes, the people that make things happen. And today we got a wonderful guest. Thora is wow. I mean, I think I'm going to bring her onto screen now, but I think for me, Thora's got such a vast amount of experience and knowledge across many areas. I've not yet had someone with a psychology background on our show yet, and especially with the amount of education and also the journey that you've had, Thora. So I'm going to bring you onto screen and let everyone have a look and say hello. How are you doing, Thora? You good?
Hello. Yes, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you like to know?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about where it began. I mean, if I look at your, let's call it your pedigree in terms of all the accolades and all the wonderful achievements that you've had, but also just listening to your story before the podcast as well,
Mhm.
about some of the challenges you've had as well in your life, and how you've overcome them, and how you've actually sort of got yourself into different directions, different sort of spaces, and put yourself into, I would say, really good positions to grow as a human, and also just to
Oops. Was everything okay?
Thora, sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. What happened? I was worried about our Wi-Fi seems to be fine here.
No, it's not. It's not you. It's me. So literally, my PC, which is this massive server machine, decided. I think Microsoft decided to to run a reboot.
Oh no. Do we start again then, or how do we
No,
do
we just
this?
carry on, and
Okay.
we're absolutely fine.
You may have seen my daughter coming and helping me, but I knew our Wi-Fi was okay. We did have a power cut the other night, but the lights are still on, so I knew it wasn't that. But
yeah, so
anyway.
I just see this screen come on. We have to do a reboot, and whoop, off it goes, and we just had to wait for it to come back on. Yeah. Thank you for your patience. So let's go straight into it. So Thora.
Yes.
So we've introduced you, and we've said, okay, fine. There's a mass amount of background and story behind, Thora, the human being, and not titles and the education and so on. Tell us where it all started. I mean, when you were at school, I mean, is this something that you were looking at doing? Is it what were your dreams, and what were you looking to be doing, and then how did you end up into where you are right now?
Yeah, it's quite a story actually. So, well, I'll start from the beginning. I'm born in Norway, and when I was 4, we moved to Canada. So that's kind of where my father was studying, and we lived in several cities within Canada, and then a lot of for sort of one reason or another, we did sort of move a fair bit. So I was always, the new person in the class and having to meet new people and that sort of thing. So I guess I get the my social side from that experience that, you just sort of had to go out there and make new friends. And then obviously we lived in both Quebec and Ontario, Toronto. So you've got sort of cultural differences there as well. So that was, always an interesting experience. But I think the biggest culture shock I had was moving back to Iceland at the age of 15. So from Toronto, which is quite a big, multinational city, back to, well, I say back, but it was really for me the first time moving to Reykjavik. So my family background is from Iceland. And it was quite a challenge. So I sort of thought I had a lot of, that I was quite prepared, having moved a fair bit and also having visited Iceland. Maybe not that often, because back in those days it was quite a trek, flying via New York and up to Iceland. And it was, not sort of a thing that one did often. So it was a lovely place to visit. Sort of as a child, but I'd never envisaged actually living there. So it's a interesting, I think, issue of identity where I am obviously Icelandic, but think differently because being raised elsewhere, and then obviously moving somewhere where you look Icelandic, you sound Icelandic, your name is Icelandic, people expect you to be like them, but hey, you're not. So I know Reykjavik's quite multicultural now, or a bit more than it was, but at the time it was quite homogenous and insular. And I'm not meaning this to offend anybody Icelandic who's listening, but it was, I think that's probably where my interest in culture and culture clash and cultural integration sort of came into it, but not necessarily in the context of mergers and acquisitions, obviously back then. It was more just in terms of, in fact, when I was at college in Iceland, I was very interested in going to South Africa to study sort of different, how different people interacted there. And sadly, I've never even made it to this day, but hopefully soon. And so that, I think, was just having that firsthand experience of kind of integrating into different cultures, trying to fit in, and the challenge of that. So I think that's definitely has molded me. from there, I went back after university. So I studied psychology. I've always been interested in people, and psychology was quite a varied degree. Although I must say, I think I was more keen on anthropology, but at the time I was sort of thinking, in terms of career. And then to do masters, you have to, well, I knew I didn't want to sort of stay in Iceland. So I did go back to Canada, started a finance degree, which wasn't that exciting, actually. I thought it would be more like an MBA, but there was such a sort of, a lot sort of about the numbers. And then for personal reasons, I met somebody who lived in Edinburgh at the time. And then I sort of, so he was saying that you can actually go and do a PhD in the UK without doing a master's first. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. So I applied to a few universities in Scotland and got in, moved to Edinburgh. And that's, I think, where I applied so it was like a business school, Edinburgh Business School, which is part of Heriot-Watt University. And I can't remember my exact thinking at the time, but obviously my thesis was on acquisitions and the effect on employees. So I was sort of thinking about how the acquisition process would affect employees, and also taking models from anthropology and applying them to the acquisition sort of process. So looking at, different, I mean, I won't turn it into a university lecture, but it was sort of applying models that had been used before in terms of anthropology, but applying it to the business context. So that was very interesting. I spent 4 years researching acquisitions, and I did sort of case studies in London. And what's interesting, so this is going back quite a number of years. And at the time, the quote for acquisition failure rates were at least 70%, like 70, 80%. And it didn't matter what type of index or definition you used for failure. I used the one where the acquisition doesn't live up to the initial objectives set. So I wasn't necessarily looking at, share prices or that sort of thing, but it was quite high. And what I find really interesting now, just seeing sort of what people are writing, is that it hasn't changed much. So there's still a high failure rate. Or not, when I say failure, I don't mean, that it completely fails. It's just that it doesn't quite live up to expectations, or wasn't worth the hassle, etc. And this is, 20, 25 years later. So it's obviously something that people, companies
well,
like
I mean,
to do.
if I could, if I could sort of let's flesh that out a bit, because isn't it a lot to do with expectations, the human nature of always seeing, I would say, not always, mostly seeing the positive, and seeing the great benefits without necessarily taking all the risks and other things into account, and also the intangibles. I mean, taking human beings, that sometimes, even if you take two banks, I mean, and you put them together, they are generally culturally very, very different, although they do exactly the same thing. They run bank accounts. So, and I think if you look at that, that overestimation seems to be, not necessarily, it seems to be a human trait. And I think we generally tend to do that even in our personal lives to a certain extent. And I don't think it just happens with M&A, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, because regardless of how something might look on paper, you don't really know. What I found with, I was looking at acquisition sort of 2 or 3 years down the line. So obviously the people that were least happy had left by then. But even of the remaining people, it was very much around how things had been handled, and also, I mean, the changes that had been made. But I think the main thing was really, it wasn't necessarily about, for me, if I remember, I mean, this is going back a long time. It wasn't necessarily about what the differences were, but more about how things were handled and to what extent the integrate, to what extent there was like a forced integration, or that you have to do things our way, without necessarily going about it the correct
Well,
way. But
sometimes
yeah,
the bigger party acquiring a smaller party has a much stronger influence in terms of the direction that they want to go. So
yeah, no, of
does its
course.
size, it's
Yeah.
how strong the internal cultures are, or systems and processes, or who comes to the table with, I think with the more dominant attribute, whatever that is.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think also in terms of culture, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a culture change expert, but it's more about that things aren't necessarily revealed until you start to integrate. So you don't, and then you get issues of personalities and politics, and a lot of things that are not necessarily measurable or even visible until it's if you use the I guess the metaphor of the fish in the fish tank, they don't necessarily see the water that they're in. So it's the same with culture. You just take things for granted, or you're not aware of that this is one way of doing it until it's threatened. So I think in a lot of cases, there are so many elements that cannot be assessed in advance, which is why we were quite interested in offering this service sort of in, I guess, what you referred to as phase 3. So it's further down the line after things have been integrated and sort of beginning to settle, but there's still residual maybe conflict or resistance, which is difficult to assess in advance. I mean, it can perhaps sometimes be, but there are a lot of issues that don't arise until you actually start. So yeah, and I guess that's true in life with a lot of other things. As you said, you don't know
I think
until you do it. So yeah,
with anything, even personal relationships with your
yeah,
children, with your siblings, your parents, and if you've got grandkids, with them. I mean, everything has got a different dynamic, and there's
definitely.
always something at play. And I think that's
Yeah.
just human nature. Just going through. So you had multiple moves in your life. In fact, my uncle flew for the Royal Air Force, and then was he was transferred to Canada, and then he flew for the Royal Canadian Air Force. I think
Okay.
there was something there, and then he met my
Yeah.
aunt, who was a nurse in I think Quebec, and
Okay.
yeah, and that's where their story. So just understanding that sort of culture to a certain extent, and then coming to this side of the pond, if you like, and even the way things have changed. I mean, even speaking to you digitally now, that was not that possible 10, 15, 20 years ago, even longer. So even just the way we communicate, the speed at which we communicate, and also what we get influenced by has also changed significantly over time. So
Yeah.
it's actually very, very interesting to see how the dynamic changes, but human nature generally stays the same.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know
very
how
true.
what's your view on that, as you go into working with your clients and so on.
Yeah, so I mean, just thinking about how things have changed recently, with a lot of things being sort of remotely and on Zoom. I mean, it's great because it does open up a lot of opportunities geographically, but I think there's a lot, especially if I'm thinking of team facilitation, team coaching, which is what we are offering. It's you do I think somebody quoted, and I think I can't remember if it's at least 95% of communication is nonverbal. So it's kind of being in the room with people, and just watching and listening and in the pauses. So I think you do lose a lot being sort of remote and on a screen. So I mean, I think it's like swings and roundabouts, really. And in terms of culture, I mean, it does make the world smaller in a lot of ways, but I'm not sure really about the cultural side, whether it's if you're sort of working, if you're in a multicultural organization and dealing with people, whether it's probably still useful to sort of try and meet in person in real life. But
yeah, I find that
I
find that depending on what you do and what you engage with, but I think the way that things are changing, I mean, we got AI coming in now with this these new applications coming in that can literally write content for you and answer questions and so on, and there's this mass data that's been collected. But going back into your story, for me, what's really intriguing is that you've had a few bumps in the road as well as a few changes in your career. So you were that side of the pond in Canada. You came across and you did your PhD. You got involved in sort of studying M&A and sort of that's that sort of space, if you like. What happened after that? I mean, where did things go from there?
Yeah, so then when I finished I moved from Edinburgh down here. So I'm in the southeast, just outside of London, and that was sort of for personal and work reasons. And I've always been sort of thinking about it. I guess it wasn't a conscious thing at the time, but I've always enjoyed creating and developing products. And at the time, it was very much about sort of employee attitude surveys. And so I worked for some consultancies helping them develop those, employee attitude surveys, just sort of in terms of going back. So my BA thesis in the psychology was looking at job satisfaction. So even back then, I was quite interested in people's well-being. So that, so looking at how, I guess it was called, because there was a differentiation between business climate and business culture. And climate was more, about communication and, happiness and meaning and that sort of thing. And that interested me. So I did work for consultancies developing surveys around that. And I also worked in recruitment as well, which was quite an interesting experience, which is again why I'm interested in helping people with their careers. And but from that, I didn't go down the route of occupational psychology. So I didn't train in sort of Myers-Briggs and those sort of things, or those sort of instruments. I went straight. I wanted then after that some experience, some sort of real client-facing experience. So my career took a slight turn in that I then went and worked in IT for quite a number of years. In account management, and that was really good because it involved a bit of, you had to be really quick, if things went wrong technically or whatever, you had to really deal with things very quickly and get the right people involved, get the right people out to clients. Some clients were based in Europe, etc. So I really enjoyed that side of things. I wasn't so massively technical myself, but it did give me a lot of skills and experience in sort of managing people quite quickly and keeping clients happy. So that was very, very good. And then
give us then some sort of, if you had to sort of distill that down into one or two sort of golden nugget things that you learned, out of the surveys and the people that you've been exposed to in that period, and often we learn sort of principles and we learn some of the core things that never change. And maybe there's a few principles or a few golden nuggets that you managed to take away from that
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, sure. So for me personally, in the first experience, you know, because I was very much, I did say I'm not techie, but I do enjoy statistics and that sort of thing. So working on the employee attitude survey, you know, the creative side, what I eventually found to be missing, which I was interested in, was actually the individuals. So rather than sort of, yeah, so I mean, yes, you could have, you know, 65% of people say this, etc. You know, you would get results from what you were creating, but it didn't actually, there was some sort of human element of it I found missing that interested me more, is to sort of delve a bit deeper as to why somebody would not be happy with something or want to improve a certain way of working. So I don't know if that's a golden nugget, but it was something for me that I felt was missing in that. And it was very much a thing back then to do these surveys. And like many things in management, they're like things are sort of, there's a trend or a fashion for certain things and then it moves on. So for me, I could only go so far in how interested I was without actually speaking to people and trying to get sort of to the root of, you know, why they felt a certain way. In terms of the IT, that experience, it again, it's all about communication, because what we had to worry most about were the clients that didn't communicate. So we had ongoing, it was, you know, it was based on clients would be, you know, paying us monthly. So as well as, you know, offering new products and new bits of software, it was also about retaining clients and just making sure that they're happy. And it was always the clients who you never heard from. And I found that very interesting at the time. And I've kind of carried that indirectly forwards, if that makes sense. So it's not about, oh, we never hear from them, they must be therefore cracking on and being happy, because they were often the ones that you would suddenly just, you know, they would kind of, you know, go elsewhere or whatever. So it for me, it was about a lot of communication, a lot of whining and dining, you know, just being really quick, resolving issues. And if issues couldn't be resolved quickly, you would still be sort of, you know, communicating and reassuring. I mean, it was market research software, so it wasn't software for, you know, hospitals or air traffic control or something, but it was still, you know, it still had to be dealt with. But yeah, it was all around human communication and reassurance. So again, yeah, so that's
It's
yeah,
a very
that sort of,
interesting point you raise about. I suppose there's a continuum in terms of, you know, you have the very noisy, let's call it, clients that sort of just want everything and they want it now, and they want as if you their own, or they yeah, you their only service provider, and vice versa, and almost like you work for them. And then there's the other clients on the other side of the continuum that that you never hear from, and you have to do something to engage. And I think it's when it comes to the acquisition process as well, you know, when you're taking into account sort of feedback and communication and so on, and when you're looking at any kind of change or change management, it's to have a structure in place and a system, if you like, as opposed to do it on the fly and on gut feel, if you like. So a system of communication, and let's call it a proven system or a tested system of communication, and a sequence of things that make sure that you are always doing that. I call it checking the temperature. You know, where are they in terms of the level of engagement? And if they're not engaging themselves, it means that I need to do more. And if they're over engaging, I potentially need to do a little less, so that they feel like they're pulling me in, as opposed to the other way around. So there's a nice balance there, but that you have the systems and that are in place, the communication systems that is. So I don't know. Do you have anything around that? Any comments around that?
yeah, I think definitely to know sort of, whether it's a system, definitely a person, or, to know where to go and who to contact. And again, around the sort of quieter clients, just to sort of keep them engaged and find out, what is going on. And maybe things, maybe everything is okay and they are just sort of happily using things. But as a in terms of servicing clients, you certainly want to be, and I think you said earlier, about you're almost working for them. Well, yes, it is very much that you are almost working for them. So
Yeah.
but no, I think a system definitely, because you don't want things to just reach heightened emergency situations and nobody knows who to speak to. So definitely a channel of communication, and then ongoing feedback.
So yeah, some years back, I had the privilege of doing a bit of work with the Unilever. It's one of the change programs they had, and what was interesting in that whole dynamic was there were multiple geographic regions that were being consolidated at particular departments, etc. And what was really interesting there was that how do you get really intelligent people, but that are not necessarily, that don't necessarily voice their concerns, opinions, etc. And then you have those that are, I wouldn't say less intelligent, but those that tend to not really add much value, tend to sometimes be the noisier ones. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but you have that space where you want to get everybody contributing, and in a change program, in any kind of change, it's, do the people really want to be there? Because I've also picked that up, was that you can try your best to make someone happy, and this is not the Unilever case, I'm just talking about in general now, that you can try and make someone happy, but if they haven't decided themselves to be happy within their job, their career, their whatever it is, or they've got problems and issues elsewhere that they bring to work, there are other dynamics at play. It's not just a perfect silo that you're working with. And in terms of change management and the surveys and things that you've done, have you experienced it? Have you seen this type of thing?
I wouldn't sort of get beyond involved in the surveys, sort of beyond what the outcome was as such. It was more sort of a diagnostic and then recommendation. So sadly we didn't go back in, and that would have been quite interesting actually to see how things went. But yeah, I assume you're talking about sort of internally in terms of silos and that sort of thing. I mean, this is why I've developed with an associate this team optimization service, is to help management and executive teams exactly with that, to just sort of uncover what the issues are in terms of people working together.
Share a bit about that, because I'm finding that very interesting, and that's what I'm trying to lean towards, is because you seem to be naturally drawn in that direction, based on your career and your path, and obviously some of the discussions we've had before. But just tell us a bit about this new team and the direction that you're going in, because for me, it's almost like a good fit for you and where you're going. It's almost like drawing you into that space. Tell us why and how and so on, and tell us a little about that journey that you're on at the moment.
Yeah, so I have a very good just following on, I've since my previous role, I've worked in sort of a lot of research around M&A, etc., and coaching. But the reason that I was interested in this team optimization service, I have an associate who I've been working with for a few years, and he actually recognized the need for integrating new people, sort of especially as managers and quite sort of senior level people, that often when they join a new company, or indeed when people leave, that there's a lot of tacit knowledge that goes with them. So it's things that are not necessarily recorded or registered anywhere, or it's just a lot of knowledge that somebody has acquired through, being somewhere for any length of time, or a new person joining. So he and I were sort of talking about this and decided that it would be quite good to develop a framework in terms of helping teams communicate with each other and to share this sort of tacit knowledge, and to look at issues of communication and climate. So we have a set number of questions that we do ask, and then we work around just looking at what the issues are for each individual person. So it's a process where we look at the team and then the individuals sort of privately, and obviously we have to have boundaries around what we can share and with the others, and what remains private, and then bringing the teams together and working with them. So we've called this team optimization, and there are I do have a little leaflet here, but there are several situations where it can be quite useful. I mentioned about the new member integration, and then internal sort of integrations, etc., but also around mergers and acquisitions. So where I'm personally interested, bearing in mind my kind of more academic background around M&A, is to apply this service to integrations. It can help really at any stage of the process, but where I'm particularly interested is in the further down the line where communications are perhaps still a little bit difficult, and where teams are beginning to work together, and that there is sort of that tacit knowledge there that needs to be shared. So it's looking at the knowledge, the skills, how people like to communicate, how people like to do things, and then obviously as a business psychologist myself, if I'm involved myself in offering the service, then it's looking at the dynamics then between the members and politics and that sort of thing. But it obviously can be very sensitive situations, but so that's kind of where I'm at with the teams. And again, it's to avoid silos, and it's to help with resistance issues. So it's not necessarily I don't get involved in sort of massive reorganizations, that's sort of left to management consultants, I guess, or internal integration people. So it's more coming in as a business psychologist and helping with the dynamics of the teams. And also I must differentiate between that and instruments that are out there that look at sort of characteristics of people in terms of putting teams together. That's very valuable, but that's not what we offer. We sort of take what's in front of us and then try to analyze, where things can go.
Yes, I suppose I suppose if you look at it from an academic point of view, there are multiple schools of thought in pretty much anything. And I studied economics. You study game theory and then chaos theory, and then there's so many different theories about trying to understand the world and trying to create a lens through which to look at it. And I think there's one school of thought that's heavily inclined towards things like the Clifton Strengths and Colby and Myers-Briggs, and you look at those sort of, it's almost like human nature wants a bit of a plug and play sort of, let's put in some data, we'll get an output, and then there's pretty much, there you are, that's your label, that's, now we can try and get these people to work together. And it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And then on the other side is let's look at the team specifically, the individuals specifically, and let's understand that little microorganism, if you like, and help them achieve the best that they can, as opposed to sort of a plug and play approach where it also works. So, the school of thought could be joint, it could be this way or that way, it could be something else. I mean, tell us a little bit about your thinking around sort of what are best practices in getting teams to work, let's say, within a changing environment, and when change is forced upon them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily an either or way of thinking. I think they both have their place. But because the service that we specifically offer would be taking into account, you know, objectives of the acquisition, it would very much be sort of focused around that as well, rather than you know, it's around specific issues that arise in terms of the acquisition as well.
Okay,
So
okay.
even,
So
you see what I mean?
the business case,
yeah.
so it's based on the business case. It's saying this is the outcome we need, and here is yes, Thora and her team, and this is an additional support element, if you like, to help you achieve that outcome. Because obviously there are other professionals and practitioners that have other skill sets. I mean, you look at financial operations, logistics and HR and other types of skills, but combined, everyone's working towards a particular business outcome. Is that's sort of where your team fits? Is that right?
Yeah. So yes, very much so. And I mean, you can obviously have issues where not everybody agrees. You know, not everybody either understands or agrees with, you know, where people want to head. So, I mean, it's very difficult. Yeah. So I mean, it's just a service where you would realize somewhere along the way, actually, this isn't quite going according to plan, and actually, we're not 100% sure why. So it's as well as, you know, offering facilitation, it is also like diagnostic, but very much in the context of what you're looking at, if that makes sense. So now, in terms of the instruments or diagnostic instruments, I mean, that could, you know, as a result of the work that we do, we could say, okay, it would be very useful for this team to, you know, look at that instrument, or, you know, whatever the issue may be. So it's not to say that it wouldn't ever apply. Our service is more about sort of uncovering what the issues are. And then, you know, as I say, there might be a situation where the team is, you know, could do with more people with certain traits, which it doesn't have. So it could be an issue of just, you know, bringing on new people, or, you know, I'm not going to say get rid of people, but that scenario. Yeah, but it's just, I often find, and I've got nothing against instruments. Obviously, I worked in, you know, creating surveys and that sort of thing. And surveys could still be applicable on a sort of a large scale, you know, taking the temperature of things. But I would say this is more, yeah, I think it wouldn't be enough just to you know, correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, there might be
I'm liking it because I'm liking it because I think there's a space that often gets missed, because I mentioned AI and I mentioned sort of these tools and so on. There's a space where we still need human beings, and I think what I'm concerned about, I think, in the bigger picture of things, is somebody thinks there can just be an app for it, or, you know, the concern is that you also have often the management teams and that are let's call it older in generation, and you have younger generation people coming through that apply their lenses differently to, let's call it, the older generation that have more experience, but they've got experience in an older methodologies of working, as opposed to the newer methodologies. So there's this, is a long tenure in a position, is that a good thing? Does it count against you? Does it count for you? And what's the balance? Because sometimes you've been there too long and you can't bring about the change. Sometimes you can embrace the change much easier because you've seen this stuff before. You've seen the ups and downs of economies, and, collapses and so on. And you've gone through maybe a few M&A cycles and change cycles within organizations. We've all been through those big, let's call it ERP and other kind of business management systems changes. I mean, they themselves have massive change management within them, and that's just within one organization. With M&A and with mergers and that, you're bringing in multiple people and dynamics and organizations together. Often it's not just one single merger, it could be a roll-up. So you have a series of mergers that are happening. So you got constant change, and every time you bring in a new individual, you got a different dynamic.
Yeah, no,
and you got to
absolutely.
do new inputs and so on. So yeah, tell us a bit about that. How do you cope with that?
Well, again, I think it's about communication. So or my personal opinion is that there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong, or sort of not an overall right or wrong. It depends on the context, obviously. But I think around communication, it's interesting what you were saying about older people that have been there for a long time. Again, they are the people with the tacit knowledge, which the young people can learn from. But again, the older people can also learn, more about modern ways of doing things, if I can be so blunt to use that wording. So, yeah,
I want to share
it's
an
about
example.
an awareness, I think, rather than that one is right and one is wrong and a phasing out. I don't.
I want
Yeah,
to share an
yeah,
example. So I've got
yeah,
four children. So
yeah.
my eldest is now going to 27, and my
Mhm.
youngest is going on 18. So there's around sort of a 9-year gap between the two, and that's just 9-year gap.
Yeah.
And they see the world differently.
Mhm.
And I'm just, and if you bring that into the workplace, just a few years, one generation, two generations is a big difference. And just the experiences of having grown up with more digital, less digital, for instance, or
Yeah.
a different education system or different philosophies they're being taught at school, at universities. I mean, I think universities have gone, depending on where you go, you're getting taught all different types of things that weren't necessarily taught in the
Yeah.
past.
Mhm.
And I think there's this kind of dynamic. And if you look at that whole thing, for me, I like your approach, because it is bringing human beings into the space and interacting with other human beings and understanding the dynamic of that particular situation, because you can't do that with a generic application or a generic set of tools. You've got to have a combined set of tools.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we do have a framework. So like we have a process and a framework. So it's more than just sort of let's have a chat sort of thing.
Tell us a little about that. I mean, I'm very keen to hear about your framework that you use.
Yeah, no, well, when I say framework, I mean it's a sort of a 5-stage process. So we will initially, have in-depth discussions with the usually, whoever's commissioning commissioning the work, so to speak, just to find out a little bit about what they see the issues as being. Then we will have in-depth team coaching with the executive team, the management team, any level, any level team really, where the sort of issues are, and it doesn't necessarily have to reach complete breaking point for us to come in. I mean, it can also be just something that would be very useful in terms of possibly preventing things or highlighting issues that could come up. And so we have a set of questions that we then sort of share with the team and try and get the information from them as a team. And so part of that process is also observing the team and how they interact with each other. So there's a lot, I said about nonverbal communication and that sort of thing. So that's kind of, I guess, where the psychology bit comes into it. And then following on from that, we will coach or have it not, it's not coaching. Well, we will have coaching sessions with the individuals and try and sort of find out personally what their issues are and what came out of the depending on what came out of the team discussion, if there are things that we specifically want to discuss with that individual a bit further. Obviously, we have to have a strict in terms of like boundaries, what is shared and what is not shared moving forward. And so then the third stage is then just bringing the team together, with all of this new information. And then, so in our context, it's around M&A, but it can be used in other situations as well. So we're working together at helping them find ways that they can then improve communication, share specific knowledge, or as you were saying, they could have further assessments on the team, or maybe somebody needs a bit of leadership training, whatever the outcome is. But the main thing is that it's that sort of team element to it. So it's, we're all working as a team, we're working for this company. There might be a few nuances or issues that need a bit of ironing out, so to speak. Not that you're going to force anybody to do to do anything they don't want to, but certainly highlight the issues, and then just action points from that. So it's a very practical, phased process of facilitation, and then we will follow up at an agreed time sort of in the future, just to ensure that
how long does a process like that normally take?
So it's 5 days. I mean, we obviously appreciate that people have busy schedules and we might not get to every individual kind of on the same day, but the whole so it's 5 days and can be spread according to just what suits the client. And and then, I mean, we do also do individual executive coaching to do with other aspects, other aspects that come up for the individual that aren't necessarily linked to the team, but can be linked to an acquisition situation. So that I'm very interested in sort of providing as well. So I have a certain system for that, but it's not my system that it's a system I'm trained in, but it's not one I developed. But yeah, so it's very much about.
I think it's sort of almost, for me, it's almost the unsung heroes that are behind the leadership team to a certain extent, that support. You have a leadership team that's highly skilled, professional, let's call it ambitious. They know exactly where they're going, what they want, how they want to achieve it. But sometimes there are just small things that you can help tweak. It's like any let's call it high performance athlete. They all have coaches, they all have some kind of mentorship, they all have some kind of process or program psychologically anyway to reach the pinnacle of their careers. And I would imagine that the kind of people that you would work with are really large organizations that have mass responsibilities to multiple, if not thousands, of employees who have their own families and have other responsibilities. And so that weight could be quite a heavy burden to carry for a lot of these people. So for them to have a support structure around them, leaders and people have to make critical decisions. If I just look at the tech space, there are a lot of companies right now that are laying off. I mean, Meta, I think Amazon, and there are a whole lot of companies that are reducing staff numbers, and those are tough decisions to make. Those are not something you just get up in the morning and say, look, I need to get rid of 8,000 people or 10,000 people or 10% of my workforce. I mean, that's pretty tough to do. That is a process, and I'm sure that's the kind of support, and especially when you're looking at M&A and all that type of thing. Those are big decisions that these guys have to carry, and they want particular outcomes. So they would need to be able to bring their teams along with them, and I think that's, for me, is a great space to work in, and that's what I imagine, and I'm trying to sort of extrapolate what you're saying into. That's the way I see what you do. Is that a fair sort of summary of that?
Yeah, no, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes. So definitely around, I mean, ultimately it's about sort of, yes, business objectives and that sort of thing. But yes, around just making work people's sort of working lives easier, when they're faced with change and challenges. I guess sort of going back to my growing up, that if one has support in facing and working together with people that think differently and do things differently, then that's yeah. So it's all not saying that I'm here to make everything harmonious and it's as easy, it's sort of
It's
one,
not.
two,
It's not.
three, but
It's not easy.
but if you can do your best, and yes, I mean, of course there will be, unfortunately it's part of life, redundancies and that sort of thing. And then sometimes you might get people that think, aha, actually this isn't for me, I don't want to stay on at this company, or I don't want to kind of do things the way the acquirer does things, or I don't want to relocate, whatever it is. Then it's we can help people sort of in that space as well, just in terms of we mentioned pivoting earlier. I mean, that's a big thing as well, that people can pivot in their careers. It might be a big opportunity for people to do something different that they've always wanted to do. So it's kind of a little bit of like reframing to go to psychology, positive psychology, I guess, is looking at things as new opportunities, rather than obviously things have to be done in a fair and legal way. But if situations arise, either enforced or just from within people, that they want to try something different, then we certainly offer sort of career
I like that.
exploration.
So yeah. So I mean, I'm just looking at a document here, and one of the key words for me is navigate. So navigating change, and for me, that's sort of a takeaway that I get a sense that you're quite highly skilled in doing, is helping people navigate those moments that that come about, and having that, I think, that sense of not just the empathy that's required, but also that the understanding of human nature, having the background of, and even having gone through multiple changes in your own life, it's you can connect with change. So I'm liking that. I just want to go through the professional membership. So you've got Chartered Management Institute, British Psychological Society, Market Research Society, and the Southeast Coaches Group, and those are some of your memberships. And then you got a BA in psychology at the University of Ireland. Iceland. Sorry, not Ireland, Iceland. And then a PhD in business organization from Edinburgh. And what's really interesting, coming from Canada, which is part of the Commonwealth, but it's a completely different sort of country, coming into, Edinburgh is it's a nice place. I mean, I like Edinburgh. It's from a cultural point of view, and the people are great and friendly and so on. And then coming down to the southeast, and this is a different dynamic as well. This is a lot more hustle and getting on with life, a lot more, I would say a lot more people. So therefore, there's a lot more movement and so on. So those dynamics change, and then if you go then to Iceland, that's completely different again. So, yeah, I'm just sort of trying to summarize all the things that you've been sharing.
Yeah, I mean, it's I do. So I think, well, it's nice here where I am. It's a sort of leafy Surrey, so you've got the best of both worlds with the countryside, and then a short distance equidistance to the coast and to London. So, where it's like, I just love multicultural, I guess, because having grown up in Toronto, everyone is from somewhere, unless you're Native American. So, to me, that's normal. So for me, it's not normal that everyone should be the same. So it's kind of boring. but yeah, no, it's yeah. So I mean, it's been a journey. I mean, I do like going to. I'm going to the West Country next week when my parents come and visit. So I do like, and also their summer house in Iceland is really smack dab in the middle of nowhere, and I do love that. I do love getting away and having absolutely nothing around and just nature. In fact, we were going to set up retreats in Iceland before COVID, and yeah, something I might revisit. But yeah, I think balance, a bit of everything, and being sort of tolerant of different viewpoints, I think, is one thing. I guess that I'm not saying I'm necessarily massively tolerant, but I mean, it does sort of having an experience of different cultures. It, allows you to
because I mean, we've got, ESG has become a really big thing, and then EDI, which is now the, the big sort of drive at the moment, and so on. I mean, there's all kinds of equality issues and so on. I mean, that those are external pressures that leaders have to cope with. Dynamics that are almost being forced upon them, that are sometimes not necessarily what they need to do right now in terms of what the business requires. So there's a bit of conflict there sometimes. I'm just, what is your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not talking about sort of the legal side of things necessarily. We're I think it's a tricky one, but you also have to be careful not to do things just in terms of paying lip service to something, because I think people will see through that.
Well, the greenwashing was quite a thing at one stage.
Yeah, I just I mean, there's a lot around. Yeah, again, it's about sort of paying lip service or doing something because it looks good versus genuinely taking things on board. But I mean, I think it's kind of moving in the right direction, but I think, like with all change, it happens gradually.
It happens slowly, and it happens over time, and just when you got the one change done, there's more things to change. So
I was just gonna go back to the navigate when you were saying I like the word navigate. Well, it is also because I do sailing, so I wanted I wanted that sort of nautical, that you kind of not me personally set a course. I'm kind of crew more like, but
I love that, because if I read the sentence, it's Thora's mission is to help individuals, teams, and companies navigate change successfully.
Yeah,
and for me, that's that for me is probably what encompasses what you do and who you are. Maybe as we come to the end of the podcast, just sort of share a little bit about sort of where are you at, sort of how do people get hold of you, sort of what are you, how, and what can you do to help people?
Yeah, sure. So I have a website, which is www. and then it's a double T, and then basically my surname, so T and then my surname.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, I think would be the best place. And basically so as well as working with individuals on executive coaching, I've got sort of people can come to me as private clients, nothing to do with mergers and acquisitions. That's kind of my bread and butter. You can also contact me in terms of if you want to find out more about the team optimization. Always happy to talk about that. I come as a double act on that side of things. And then alongside, I'm also growing a team of associates who offer other services within the M&A process, but that's geared towards smaller businesses who need support with you know, the whole sort of process, including like a legal and that sort of thing. So it's kind of that has kind of been building up. So my long-term plan is to get that completely off the ground. And then just in terms of
Exciting.
what, yeah,
Exciting time.
yeah. So, but in terms of me, personally, what I offer is the team optimization and then the one-to-one sort of private executive coaching, where I offer a service for people who are looking to pivot their careers, and it's kind of based on quite a well-known system. There's more information on my website on that, and even a webinar. So, but yeah, I think that sums everything.
That sums it up
Yeah,
very well. And then I just want to read the last part of that sentence where you talk about increasing satisfaction, but and improve work adjustment post merger. So the work adjustment side of things for me also comes out a lot in any of my conversations with you is navigating change and then being able to adjust to those changes that are being thrust
absolutely.
People.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and again, you know, if there are situations where, so I mean, that can either be as part of the team optimization or just individuals, you know, approaching me sort of directly, discreetly, etc. But obviously it depends for me who the client is. So we've got one big client hopefully coming out, which is very exciting. But yeah, if somebody wants to just come to me directly as a result of
and I think
issues.
I want to just highlight one other thing, and which does stand out for me is discretion and confidentiality. You've maintained that in any of my conversations with you. You don't share. You know, so if someone comes to you with an issue or a question, you know, you don't divulge any unnecessary or confidential information. So, which is great, and I think people need to know that it's a safe pair of hands, to use a bit of a cliche, to come to someone like you.
No, I mean, I have to abide by very strict, as you know, especially as part of the British, belonging to the British Psychological Society. I mean, it's just sort of one of the main, and it's the confidentiality.
So I mean that's absolutely that's brilliant. Any last sort of thoughts before we close off, Thora? Anything else you'd like to share?
No, I just want to thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm sorry about the technical glitches, but hopefully it will.
Yeah, I've been around tech for long enough to get panicky when the tech goes wrong. It is what it is.
No, it's been great. No, I've really enjoyed it, and
thank you, Thora, and please don't go away. I want to have a quick chat to you afterwards. I'm just going to say goodbye to the audience, and then just I'll come back to you now.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
and thank you for listening, whoever's listening.
Thank you, Thora, and I'm just going to say goodbye to everyone, but thank you again for joining us and for sharing and also going through your journey. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I'd love to invite Thora back again and to another episode where if you have any questions surrounding this type of thing, when it comes to that change and change management and the ability to lead teams through change, especially in the M&A environment, I think Thora's got a mass amount of value to add, and I want to bring her on again and sort of delve into some of the really good topics around that space. But I think today was a great first interview. Thora, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And the wealth of knowledge and experience, and we couldn't cover even touch on it in the space of an hour. But I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for joining us today on 100 Days and Beyond. That where we really try and speak to people that are behind the scenes, that help people with this tremendous amount of change, the tremendous amount of pressure that people are having to experience around, especially the tech changes, the changes around the economies, the replacement of people when it comes to new technologies, and people having to being forced to go into new careers or make tough decisions. And people like Thora, I think, are heavily needed to help people navigate through those changes. And again, I love that word, navigate. I think that does summarize what I see in Thora. Thank you very much for joining us. See you next time, and have a good rest of the week.